Matt Stoller is the director of research at the American Economics Liberties Project. He's the author of the Simon Schuster book, Goliath, the 100-Year War Between Monopoly Power and Democracy. He's worked in various positions in Washington, in Congress, and elsewhere. He's kind of just been around forever, but I believe he's one of the most informed and reliable experts on antitrust law, if not the most reliable one. He's somebody I always turn to, whose work I read, to stay informed on all matters of big tech monopoly power and antitrust. And there's this trial coming up, as we indicated at the start of the show, in September, where Google faces one of the most significant legal challenges yet to its power and its entire existence. And we're happy to have Matt, who's been on the show many times before, back again tonight to talk to us about it. Good evening, Matt. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. So let's start off with just the basics of this trial. It doesn't get a lot of media attention, even though it has the potential to be one of the most consequential trials in years. This was a lawsuit initiated by the Trump Justice Department, not the Biden Justice Department. The Biden Justice Department is continuing it, and it was brought against Google as well as by various state attorneys general. Talk about the theory of the case, what the government is alleging against Google.
Sure. So this is a case about Google search. So the allegation is that Google is an illegal monopoly. It has, excuse me, it has about 90% of the search market and roughly similar amounts of the search advertising market. And the claim from the Department of Justice, first under Trump and now under Biden, is that it acquired this power and maintains this power illegally. And specifically what Google does is they pay Apple and Mozilla and Samsung and other entities that distribute browsers through phones, distribute search engines through phones and through browsers. They pay them to put Google as the default. And then they also own Android, which is an operating system for phones, and they force Google search to be the default on that as well. And so in doing so, they make it really hard for anyone else to get into the market. And since search involves, to make your search engine better, you need to have users who then will give you data and show you what search results work and which ones don't. Because they're able to exclude anyone else from getting into the market, then they can exclude everyone else from being able to make quality search engines. So the basic theory of the case is that Google has essentially bought up all the shelf space for search, and that's illegal.
I think the central issue in these antitrust cases, not just legally but politically, is where do you draw the line between a company that just becomes very good at what it does and therefore is highly successful, everybody wants to use their product, and then it seems like you're punishing them for being successful if you bring an antitrust case, versus a situation that I think almost everybody across the political spectrum thinks the law and government should prevent, which is the elimination of real competition or the ability to compete, because obviously that disserves the consumer. It doesn't permit for a free market economy to work because there's no competition. Google's argument is that it falls into the former, that people can compete with it. It just, no one's as good as they are. And there was this recent set of events over the last, say, 6 months involving this new artificial intelligence product and the one released by ChatGPT in particular that became very successful. They were associated with Microsoft that integrated ChatGPT into Bing, which people had forgotten existed, but it actually does. It's a competitor of Google. And for a while, at least, it seemed like that was revitalizing Bing and fortifying Google's argument that they do have competitors, and those competitors, if they develop innovative products, can actually attract people to use them instead of using Google. What happened to those arguments, and do you think they demonstrate Google's perspective?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So there's a number of issues here, and philosophically, I mean, and politically, it's so obvious that Google just has too much power, right? Like, I mean, yeah, I could talk about the legal elements, but Scott Galloway is a marketing professor. He calls Google is God, right? Because we tell Google everything, we ask Google everything, and then engineers at Google decide what information we get. So this is a huge political problem, and there are all sorts of consequences to it. Now, to answer your question about whether it's kind of, it's, as Google would put it, they're sort of just better at what they do. Um, Competition is a click away. The basic question is why they pay $45 billion a year to different entities, including like $20 billion to Apple, so that they can be the default on Apple phones if they didn't have to do it. Like, they're not a charity, so why would they do that? And the answer is because they're trying to exclude rivals. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of like what, the other thing, actually, one other thing is worth mentioning, which is that Google search has kind of gotten worse over the last 5 to 10 years. Everyone sort of notices there's more ads. It's kind of harder to find things. But there are different reasons why that might be. But one of the very clear reasons, and a lot of Googlers who are coming out and saying, I'm leaving Google because it's not a fun company to work at anymore, they're saying it's not a very good company. And what you saw with ChatGPT is that Google actually had the AI stuff before anyone else, and they just didn't deploy it because they didn't really see a need to. It wasn't, they had a monopoly, and there's no reason to deploy potentially disruptive technology if you have a monopoly. So when Microsoft deploys ChatGPT, which I know it's an independent company, OpenAI, but it's like, I think 49% owned by Microsoft. It's essentially part of Microsoft. They did integrate that into Bing. And if it were an open market where there was real competition, then you would expect Bing's market share to go up. And there was some interest in Bing initially, but because of all of the defaults and all of the screens that are constantly saying, hey, are you sure you don't want to make Google your default? I mean, remember, a lot of people use Chrome. People use, Google has lots of levers that they can pull. The market share for Bing has gone right back down to 3 or 5 or 7% or whatever it was. So there was this kind of like initial interest, and then what we've shown is, or what we've seen is that it kind of came right back down. Now Google would argue, it's just because our product is better, and I think the Department of Justice is going to argue, no, it's the market structure. It's because of all of these levers that you can pull, and there are some reasons to think that the DOJ is right, but that's the gist of the argument.
So I just want to ask you a couple of examples. As you said, anyone who uses the internet knows that Google is omniscient, it is ubiquitous. We have been asking Google for help in finding what we want to find, which enables them to know exactly what our interests are. They control our email in so many ways. So many people use Gmail. There are a couple of examples that we've covered on this show over the past 6 months, and I'm interested in knowing whether these are relevant to or part of this lawsuit. One is, we recently interviewed the co-founder of Wikipedia, Larry Sanger, who talked about how this site, Wikipedia, has become systematically biased. And I mean, I think a lot of people who have pages on Wikipedia can vouch for that in so many ways, and you can look at various pages and see how glaring the bias is. And his point was, the only reason that really matters is because Google makes sure that Wikipedia is shoved down everyone's throat, that if you search on Google, your first thing you're going to see is Wikipedia. So Google even controls the reputations of people, how people are perceived. And then the other thing is, as you know, Rumble, the platform that we're on right now, has a lawsuit against Google claiming that Google abuses its search power by suppressing any competitors of Google's other platforms. So example, if you try and find Rumble videos using a Google search, it will be extremely difficult because Google is algorithmically suppressing Rumble search results because they want to protect YouTube, which is owned by Google. There's a lot of evidence for that. If you even just use Google search functions to try and find a Rumble video, you'll see it. The judge said there's a lot of merit to this claim, at least at first glance, and will allow the case to proceed. Are those the kind of things that are relevant in the trial? Or if not, what type of abuse is Google guilty of with its search engine dominance? How does it negatively affect the user?
So great questions. So it's actually really interesting. So Google is probably going to face 5 trials, major trials, over antitrust violations in different areas of its businesses and privacy problems in the next 8 months. And this is the first one. This is September and October. You're going to see a trial. This particular trial, there were some elements to it, like there were state attorneys general who have also been part of the case, and they made claims somewhat similar to the one about Rumble, although they were talking about like Yelp and TripAdvisor, what are kind of like what are called vertical search, because everything in antitrust is confusing and stupid. But essentially like downstream from Google's monopoly of search, as well as, how Google just controls the internet. So like with Wikipedia, how they just sort of shape our perceptions. You could see it like today, somebody sent me a story that CNET had to delete thousands of articles just to like make their results show up bigger and like in Google. And so basically, how is Google shaping the internet? Those are issues. The judge sort of tossed those issues out of the trial and said that's not what antitrust covers. Antitrust is much narrower. In fact, all you can really claim, the government can claim, is that Google is excluding rival search engines from the general search market using these default search agreements and using its ownership of Android. They're trying, the precedent in the circuit is the Microsoft case, when Microsoft was doing something very similar with Internet Explorer versus Netscape. So it's like it's very narrow. And this is one of the problems of the antitrust laws. It's become much narrower. But over time, you are going to see these other cases come forward. You're also seeing an investigation of Google Maps. And I think there's a lot of interest in Congress over the basic problem that you're putting forward, which is Google is just really powerful. And if antitrust can't handle a situation where they can shape our perceptions because one company controls the entire internet or the experience of the entire internet, or maybe just the gateway to the internet, then that's a problem, and Congress might have to step in. But then, like I said, the last thing I'd say is the 5 cases that I mentioned are not the end of that's a lot of litigation. I mean, the Google executives are going to be spending a lot of time in court. But you do have a lot of other cases like the Rumble case, like that are going to come down in the next few years. So I think we will ultimately get to all the problems you're talking about, because fundamentally Google's just too powerful. Everyone in the U.S. knows it. Everyone worldwide knows it. So there's all sorts of things that we're going to break up Google. We're going to deal with this problem. It's just that this is kind of like the first major challenge that we're going to see when lots of people are going to get put on the stand, and just we're going to learn a ton about how how Google works, how the internet works, how the real people who are making decisions have been making those decisions.
Let me ask about the politics of all of this. The Biden appointee that has generated the most support for me, or one of them, has been his choice to lead the Federal Trade Commission, which is Lina Khan, in part because she has devoted so much of her scholarship and her work to warning about the dangers of excess power in the hands of big tech. The Republican Party, conservatives in particular, have made anti-big tech rhetoric a central part of their public persona. When they go on cable news, when they go on to all sorts of shows, they rant and rave against the evils of big tech. And yet, a lot of Republicans, not all of them, some of them support Lina Khan, some of them support these Justice Department efforts to bring antitrust cases, but a lot of the leading Republicans, particularly Jim Jordan, who on the one hand is so vocal in spewing contempt for big tech, all well-deserved, I think, but then on the other is very hostile to Lina Khan, regards her as some sort of grave threat, and does a lot of work protecting big tech when the spotlight is off and the cameras aren't rolling. What is going on here in terms of the dynamics of the Republican Party in big tech? Is it just that the only thing they're angry about when it comes to big tech is that they're censoring the internet against conservatives as they perceive it? Or does the Republican Party kind of as a whole have real problems with how concentrated the power of big tech is?
I think there's a fight within the Republican Party. I mean, there's a fight within the Democratic Party as well. And it's almost a generational turnover. So you have senators and leaders like Josh Hawley and J.D. Vance and Ken Buck, and Matt Gaetz and others who are saying, look, we need aggressive antitrust enforcement because these firms are just too powerful. And it's not just Google, it's a whole bunch of firms, and kind of the Chamber of Commerce across the economy. And then you have members of Congress, like Jim Jordan and others, who are actively seeking to cut the budgets of the antitrust division and the FTC and prevent antitrust action against dominant firms. And the reason, and they're actually they're not just trying to prevent the federal government, they're trying to prevent state attorneys general. So you have like the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton's very conservative, and he's brought one of these 5 cases. And Jim Jordan fought against him having a special authority to have the case heard in Texas. So what's really going on is an ideological fight within the Republican Party about whether the government should be able to address corporate power itself. And Jim Jordan's main complaint against big tech firms and against big business in general is that they used to be like part of the Republican Party machine. And they're not as much now. They can be kind of like playing footsie with Democrats. And he's trying to discipline them and saying, no, you're part of our political machine, versus like other more populist members of the Republican Party who are saying, actually, consolidated corporate power is intrinsically a problem, is intrinsically a threat to liberty, and we need to break them up. So there's a real fight. I would say that I think most of the Republican establishment is kind of on the side of Jim Jordan, but that's not entirely true. Like Bill Barr under Trump did bring this suit. Ken Paxton is part of it. And then you have a bunch of you do have some leaders in Congress that are trying to do the same thing. But the Republican Party really does have a kind of like big corporation, big business addiction that they have yet to kick.
There are a couple of bills that have been around the Senate for a while that have gotten a lot of bipartisan support, including one by Amy Klobuchar and a couple of others that would actually dismantle some of this monopolistic abuse. And the allegation has been that Chuck Schumer has 2 daughters who work for big tech. I believe one of them works at Facebook, or maybe they both do, or for a lobbying firm that serves big tech. And he has
Amazon.
And Amazon, right. And he has blocked these bills from really advancing and getting a floor vote. Is that a valid criticism of Chuck Schumer?
It is. I mean, Mitch McConnell did his part too. But Chuck Schumer, promised Amy Klobuchar very publicly last summer that he would give the tech antitrust bills a vote, and then he just didn't. And there are all sorts of reasons like why, but none of them have, there's been no argument that I can see aside from he went out to, the West Coast to grab a bunch of money from some of these firms, and he has a very specific way of seeing politics. I think there's been it's not just his 2 daughters, one of whom works for Meta and one of whom works for Amazon. Like a lot of the alumni from his office have gone and worked for big tech, like dozens of ex-Schumer staffers. So there are reasons to think that it's not total good faith here. But we're gonna keep pushing. I mean, if there's enough political pressure, he will be forced to hold a vote. But it's kind of this situation where the Republicans and the Democrats and people like Schumer and McConnell are each giving each other an excuse to not have a vote. McConnell doesn't want it. Oh, no, Schumer doesn't want it. And it's like, the truth is both of them don't want it, and they're just kind of blaming the other. So I think it's a really important point, and we have this problem where everyone will talk a good game, but really nailing down who's the problem is a little bit like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall.
So last question, as this trial approaches, how excited are you? Do you have trouble sleeping when you think about it at night? How are you doing with this trial imminently arriving here?
It's a really big problem. I'm having trouble sleeping. I'm really excited, and it's hard to even talk to anyone else because of how obsessed I am with this Google trial, and no one else is really that interested. And so it's kind of socially weird for me.
Well, we're going to keep pretending that we're interested in hearing what you have to say just to give you an outlet, because we do at the show stay concerned about you, and we are always appreciative to be able to talk to you, Matt. It's always great. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.